Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive today.
Glad to be here.
We're going to be looking at 1 Corinthians 10,
Okay.
verses 1 through 33.
Right.
And it's pretty amazing how, this was written so long ago,
Yeah.
but how much it still speaks to us today.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to be kind of looking at it through that lens of like, how does this apply to me?
Right.
How does this apply to, someone who's maybe a kid listening to this, with their family?
Yeah, that's great.
How can we kind of glean some wisdom from this passage that was written so long ago?
It's really cool how Paul uses the example of the Israelites as a warning to the church in Corinth.
Yeah.
And he's basically saying like, hey, look at these guys.
Right.
They saw miracles firsthand.
Yeah.
Yet they still struggle.
They messed up.
They messed up big time.
Right.
So let's learn from their mistakes.
It's almost like he's saying like, hey, you think you got it rough?
Right.
Look at these guys.
Yeah.
They had it way worse.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then also like, look, you're not that different from them either.
Yeah. Yeah.
We all face temptations.
That's right.
We all make bad choices sometimes, even when we know better.
We do.
So let's dive into the story a little bit.
Okay. Sounds good.
So the Israelites had just escaped from slavery in Egypt.
That's right.
They've witnessed this incredible miracle of the Red Sea parting.
Yeah.
And then they're wandering through the wilderness for 40 years.
40 years.
And during this time, God is providing for them.
Right.
In these miraculous ways.
Miraculously.
And, one of the things that I always think about is the manna from heaven.
Yeah, the manna.
This is like something out of a fantasy novel.
Right.
Like bread just magically appearing every morning.
Every morning.
I feel like if I were a kid, I would love that part of the story.
Absolutely. I think that's a story that captures the imagination.
Yes.
But it's also a story of struggle and disobedience.
Right.
And even with those miracles, the Israelites grumbled.
Yeah.
They complained and they turned away from God.
Yeah.
And that's where this idea of idolatry comes in.
Okay, so idolatry.
They're in idolatry.
This is one of those things that I've always kind of struggled with.
Yeah.
Because to me, it always sounds very like...
old.
Yeah, old.
Yeah.
People bowing down to statues, golden calves, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It doesn't always feel super relevant to our lives today.
I see what you mean.
But I have a feeling Paul might disagree.
Oh, he would definitely disagree.
Okay.
I think in this passage, Paul is showing us that idolatry is so much more than just worshiping statues.
Oh.
It's anything that we put before God in our lives.
Okay.
It's about our priorities, our desires, the things we rely on more than we rely on him.
So is it fair to say then that if I am constantly checking my phone, if I'm scrolling through social media, if I'm feeling anxious when I'm not online, could that be a form of idolatry?
That's a really good connection.
Okay.
I think it definitely could be a sign that you're putting something else before your relationship with God.
Okay.
And Paul uses several examples from the Israelites' journey to illustrate different forms of idolatry.
Oh, okay.
He talks about their worship of the golden calf, of course.
Yeah.
But also things like sexual immorality, testing God, and constantly complaining.
So even something like complaining can be a form of idolatry.
It can be.
Because I guess it's like we're saying, God, I don't think you're doing a good enough job.
That's right.
So I'm going to take matters into my own hands.
Exactly.
And that attitude can be just as destructive.
It can be.
As bowing down to a statue.
Absolutely.
I've never really thought about it that way before. It's like Paul's holding up this mirror to our own lives.
He is.
And challenging us to examine our hearts.
To examine our hearts or motivations.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And he doesn't just say, avoid idolatry.
Great.
He uses a much stronger word.
He does. He says flee.
Flee from idolatry.
Run away, run away.
Fast as you can.
Exactly. And there's a real sense of urgency there. This is serious stuff.
Right.
It's not enough to just kind of passively avoid it. We need to be proactive.
Okay.
We need to make a conscious decision to turn away from anything that might lead us away from God.
It's like when you're trying to eat healthy.
Yeah.
And you see a plate of cookies.
Oh, yeah.
You know you don't want to eat them.
Right.
So you don't just stand there and stare at them.
Right.
You turn around.
Yeah.
And you walk away.
Yeah. That's a perfect analogy.
Okay.
And the good news is we don't have to do this alone.
Okay.
Paul reminds us in 1 Corinthians 10:13 that God is faithful and he'll always provide a way out of temptation.
Okay.
He won't let us be tested beyond what we can handle.
So it's like there's an escape route.
There is. So, there's a back door we can slip out of.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
That's encouraging.
It is.
Okay, so we've got Paul warning against idolatry.
Right.
And then he kind of shifts gears a little bit.
He does.
To talk about this very practical issue that was causing division in the Corinthian church.
Right.
Which is food sacrificed to idols.
Food sacrificed to idols.
And this is where things get really interesting.
They do.
It's like he's taking this abstract concept of idolatry and applying it to this real-life dilemma.
Real-life situation.
That people were facing every day.
That's right.
So imagine you're living in ancient Corinth.
Okay.
This bustling city with a marketplace full of meat.
Yeah.
But much of this meat had been previously offered to idols.
Right.
As part of these pagan rituals.
That was common practice.
So you're at the butcher shop.
Right.
Trying to buy some dinner.
Yeah.
And you don't even know if the meat you're buying is clean or not.
You don't know.
That must have been tricky.
It was a tricky situation.
Yeah, for those Corinthian Christians.
Sure.
Yeah. And it caused a lot of debate.
Yeah, a lot of debate.
Within the church.
Yeah.
Some people believed it was wrong to eat any meat that had been offered to idols.
Yeah.
Even if it meant going hungry.
That's right.
Wow.
And others felt like it didn't matter.
Okay.
Because idols were nothing but empty statues.
Okay.
So you have these two very different perspectives. Right. And Paul steps in to offer some wise counsel.
Okay.
And it's surprisingly relevant to our lives today.
Okay. I'm all ears.
All right.
What are some of the principles that he lays out?
Okay.
What can we learn from this ancient debate about food sacrificed to idols?
The first principle is don't go looking for trouble. If you don't know the origin of the food, don't ask questions.
Okay.
Just enjoy the meal.
So ignorance is bliss.
Kind of, yeah,
okay.
But the second principle is crucial. If someone tells you that the food has been offered to idols, then you should abstain out of respect for their conscience.
Okay.
So it's not about the food itself being bad. It's about the potential to cause someone else to stumble.
Okay.
In their faith.
So it's more about them than you.
It is.
Okay.
Your freedom shouldn't come at the expense of another person's spiritual well-being.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So even if we personally believe that, idols have no real power,
right?
We need to be sensitive
Sure we do.
to the fact that others might not have that same understanding.
That's right.
And be willing to make sacrifices for the sake of those around us.
Absolutely. And, this whole discussion about making wise choices, even when we have freedom, reminds me of something else Paul talks about.
Okay.
The Lord's Supper.
Okay, the Lord's Supper. How do you see that?
How do you see that
connecting to this idea of idolatry?
Yeah. What are your thoughts?
That's a great question. Let's explore that connection further after a quick break.
Sounds good.
We'll be right back.
Okay.
So we were just talking about how Paul's advice about dealing with food, sacrifice to idols, really highlights the importance of, making wise choices, even when we have freedom.
Absolutely.
And you brought up the Lord's Supper.
Yeah.
How do you see that connecting?
Well, I think what's fascinating here is that Paul draws this really sharp contrast between participating in pagan rituals and participating in the Lord's Supper.
Okay.
And he's essentially saying, you can't have it both ways. You can't claim to be united with Christ while simultaneously participating in things that go against his values.
So it's like you can't have your cake and eat it too.
Exactly, yeah. It's like trying to mix oil and water.
Right.
It just doesn't work.
You don't go together.
They don't go together.
Yeah.
And Paul uses this really powerful analogy in verses 16 through 18. He says that just as the Israelites participated in the altar through their sacrifices, we participate in Christ through the bread and the cup.
So the Lord's Supper is more than just a symbolic ritual then?
Right. It's an actual participation in Christ.
Wow.
It's a tangible expression of our unity with him and with each other.
It's like a physical reminder
it is.
Of that spiritual reality.
Yeah, when we take the bread and the cup, we're remembering his sacrifice. We're reaffirming our commitment to follow him, and we're experiencing this deep connection with our fellow believers.
It's like, it makes me think about how the early Christians, they shared everything they had.
They did.
They were truly a family.
Yes.
Bound together by their love for Christ.
Absolutely. And the sense of unity is so important because it helps us resist the temptations of idolatry.
Okay, how so?
Well, when we're surrounded by a community of believers who are striving to live for God's glory.
Yeah. We're less likely to be drawn away by the allure of the world.
It's like having a safety net.
It is.
You know, a group of people who can catch you when you stumble and remind you of what's truly important.
That's a great way to put it. And, Paul doesn't stop there.
Okay.
He goes on to talk about the table of devils.
Okay, the table of devils, that sounds a little scary.
It does sound a little scary.
Yeah.
But he's simply contrasting the fellowship that we experience at the Lord's table with the spiritual darkness that comes from participating in things that are contrary to God's will.
So it's not about literal devils or demonic forces.
Right. It's about the choices that we make, the things that we prioritize, the things we allow to shape our hearts and minds.
The things that we're feeding ourselves.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it goes back to that idea of idolatry.
Okay.
If we're filling our lives with things that are opposed to God's values, things that pull us away from him,
then we're essentially choosing to sit at the table of devils. Yeah. We're choosing to align ourselves with something that is ultimately destructive.
So we can't really serve two masters.
We can't.
Yeah.
We have to choose who we will follow.
Right. And that choice has implications for every area of our lives.
It really does.
It's not just about what we eat or drink.
Right.
It's about our priorities, our values, our relationships, our work, everything.
Everything. It affects everything.
It's about making sure that our entire lives reflect the fact that we belong to Christ.
Absolutely.
That we're seated at his table. It's about letting his values shape our decisions, our actions, our very way of being in the world.
You got it. And that brings us to one of the most crucial verses in this entire passage, 1 Corinthians 10.31.
The one about doing everything for the glory of God.
That's the one.
Okay.
Let me read it for you.
Okay.
Whether therefore ye eat or drink or whatsoever ye do, do all to the glory of God.
It's such a simple statement.
It is.
But it's packed with so much meaning.
So much meaning.
But what does it actually look like to live for God's glory in our everyday lives?
That's the question, isn't it?
It feels like such a big concept.
It is a big concept.
Yeah.
But I think it starts with understanding what glory means in this context.
Okay.
It's not about us seeking fame or recognition for ourselves. It's about reflecting God's character and attributes in everything we do.
So it's like being a mirror.
Yes.
That reflects God's goodness, love, and truth.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
To the world around us.
It's about letting our lives be a testament to who God is.
Okay.
And what she has done for us.
Okay.
It's about making him visible in a world that often seems to have forgotten him.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But how do we actually do that?
Right.
Like, can you give me some practical examples?
Sure.
Because I'm a very hands-on learner.
I understand. Well, I think about the things that we discussed earlier.
Okay.
Idolatry priorities. Making choices that honor God.
Okay.
If we're genuinely living for God's glory, those things will be reflected in our daily decisions, both big and small.
So it's about constantly asking ourselves,
yes,
what would it look like to honor God in this particular situation?
Exactly.
Okay.
What choice would best reflect his love and grace?
Okay.
It could be something as simple as choosing to be patient with a difficult coworker instead of reacting in anger.
Okay.
Or maybe it's being generous with our time and resources, even when it's inconvenient.
Okay.
It's about looking for opportunities to be a light in the darkness, to demonstrate God's love in tangible ways.
I love that it's like turning every little decision, every interaction into an act of worship.
Absolutely.
A way of saying, God, I want my whole life.
Yeah.
Even the mundane parts.
Even the mundane parts.
To point back to.
To point back to, you know, this whole idea of living for God's glory.
Yeah.
Ties back to something else Paul emphasizes in this passage.
Okay.
The importance of considering the impact our actions have on others.
Right.
Remember when we talked about being sensitive to the consciences of those around us?
Yeah.
Even if it meant giving up some of our own freedom?
Like with the example with the food sacrifice to idols.
Exactly.
Even if we know it's not inherently wrong,
right,
we should be willing to abstain if it might cause someone else to stumble in their faith.
Absolutely. And that principle applies to so many areas of life.
It does, yeah.
It's about asking ourselves, how might my choices affect the people around me?
Okay.
Could my actions potentially lead someone away from God or hinder their spiritual growth?
It's not just about our personal relationship with God then.
That's not.
It's about recognizing that we're part of a larger community.
We are.
A body of believers.
Yeah.
And our actions have ripple effects. What we do, what we say, how we live, it all matters.
It all matters. Paul is calling us to a higher standard of living.
Yes.
One that goes beyond simply avoiding bad things and focuses on actively seeking the good of others.
Okay.
Even if it means making sacrifices ourselves.
That's challenging.
It is challenging.
But also incredibly inspiring.
It is inspiring.
Yeah, it's like we're being invited to participate in something much bigger than ourselves.
Yes.
Something that has eternal significance.
Eternal significance.
You know, we're part of God's grand story.
We are.
And our lives can have a real impact.
They can.
On the world around us.
You couldn't have said it better myself, and that brings us back to that amazing statement.
Okay.
Whether therefore ye eat or drink or whatsoever ye do all to the glory of God.
Powerful.
It's a call to action.
Yeah.
An invitation to make every aspect of our lives a reflection of God's love and grace.
It's not about these, grand gestures.
Right.
Or dramatic displays of faith.
It's not about that. It's about infusing every moment.
Okay.
Every choice, every interaction with a desire to honor God.
It's about letting God's glory shine.
Yes.
Through the ordinary, everyday details of our lives.
The ordinary details.
Yeah, it's about finding ways to make him visible.
Yes.
In the mundane.
The mundane.
The routine.
Yeah.
The seemingly insignificant.
That's such a powerful thought.
It is. It really is.
Yeah, it makes me think about all the little choices that we make throughout the day.
Right.
How we interact with our families.
Yeah.
How we treat strangers. How we use our words and our resources.
Yeah.
Everything matters.
Everything matters. And that's why Paul's message is so incredibly relevant.
It is.
For us today, we live in a world that's constantly trying to distract us.
Constantly.
To pull us away from God.
Yes.
It's so easy to get caught up in the pursuit of our own desires, our own comfort, our own glory. It's no wonder Paul warned us to flee from idolatry.
It's no wonder.
Right.
But Paul is reminding us that there's a better way.
Okay.
A more fulfilling way to live.
Okay.
A way that leads to true joy.
Okay.
Lasting peace, and a deep sense of purpose.
Yeah.
A way that aligns with God's heart.
Okay.
And brings him glory.
And that way is found in surrendering our lives to God.
It is. Choosing to make him the center of everything we do. Letting his love and grace transform us.
Right.
From the inside out.
It's like we're trading in a fleeting, temporary glory for something eternal.
For something eternal.
Something that will last forever.
Absolutely.
We're exchanging a life of striving and chasing after empty promises.
Right.
For a life of abundance and joy.
Yeah.
That flows from our relationship with God.
That's beautifully said. And, it's interesting to think about how all of this connects back to the original context of Paul's letter. He was writing to a church that was struggling with all sorts of issues.
Yeah.
Division and morality, disputes over food and drink, and so much more.
So they were facing a lot of the same challenges that we face today.
They were.
Even though they lived in a completely different time and culture.
Different time, different culture.
The human heart hasn't really changed all that much, has it?
It hasn't.
Yeah.
They were wrestling with questions of freedom and responsibility, trying to figure out how to navigate a culture that was often at odds with their faith.
Right.
They were tempted by the same things that tempt us.
Right.
Power, pleasure, possessions, approval.
It's all still there.
It's all still there. And Paul's message to them was essentially focus on God's glory.
Okay.
Let that be your guiding principle in everything you do.
Okay.
Let it shape your decisions, your relationships, your entire way of life.
Yeah.
When you make God's glory your ultimate goal, everything else falls into place.
It's like he was saying, don't get lost in the details.
Right.
Keep your eyes on the prize.
Keep your eyes on the prize.
Remember why you're here.
Yes.
Whose you are and what you're called to do.
That's right.
Live for God's glory, and everything else will work itself out.
And that's a message we all need to hear today.
We do.
It's so easy to get bogged down in the minutia of life, to lose sight of what truly matters.
Right.
But Paul's words are a powerful reminder to lift our gaze, to adjust our perspective, and to remember who we are and whose we are.
We are children of God.
We are.
Created in his image.
Yes.
Redeemed by his grace.
Yes.
And called to live for his glory.
And called to live for his glory. We're called to be ambassadors of his love.
Yes.
To reflect his light in a world that is often shrouded in darkness.
Beautifully said. And, as we've been talking about all of this, I keep thinking about that image Paul uses in this passage of the Israelites drinking from a rock that he identifies as Christ.
What are your thoughts on that?
It's such a rich and evocative image.
It is.
It speaks to the idea that Christ is our source of life.
Yes.
Our source of nourishment, our wellspring of strength and hope.
Absolutely. Just like that rock provided life-giving water for the Israelites in the wilderness.
Yeah.
Christ sustains us on our journey through life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Paul's drawing this connection between the physical sustenance that the Israelites received in the Old Testament and the spiritual sustenance that we receive through Christ in the New Testament.
That's right.
Just as they couldn't survive without that water from the rock.
Yeah.
We can't truly thrive without Christ in our lives.
We can't.
He is the source of everything we need.
He is.
To live a full and abundant life.
He's the bread of life.
Yes.
The living water. The vine that gives us life.
Yes, apart from him, we can do nothing.
You're absolutely right. And this image of the rock as Christ makes the Lord's Supper even more meaningful, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
It's like we're receiving that spiritual nourishment.
Yes.
In a tangible way.
In a tangible way.
Remembering his sacrifice.
Yes.
And being filled with his grace.
It's a beautiful reminder of our utter dependence on Christ.
It is.
We need him every moment of every day.
Yes, we do.
We need his forgiveness, his guidance, his strength, his love.
Yeah.
And in the Lord's Supper, we come together as a family.
Yes.
To celebrate his provision and to renew our commitment to follow him.
It's a powerful picture of unity and belonging.
It is.
It reminds us that we're not alone in this journey.
We're not.
We have each other.
We do.
And we have Christ who is always with us.
Always.
Leading us, guiding us.
Yeah.
And providing everything we need.
Everything we need.
It's been an incredible deep dive into 1 Corinthians 10 so far.
It has.
And I'm eager to continue exploring these themes and see where Paul takes us next.
I agree. There's so much more to uncover and discuss.
There is.
Let's take a quick pause.
Okay.
And come back to wrap up our deep dive into this fascinating passage.
Sounds good. Welcome back to the deep dive. It's been an incredible journey through 1 Corinthians 10 so far. Before the break, we were talking about that powerful image of the rock as Christ and how it connects to the Lord's Supper.
Yes. It's a beautiful picture of our dependence on Christ for spiritual nourishment. And it leads us to another important question that we touched on earlier.
The one about writing a modern-day version of 1 Corinthians 10?
That's the one. If Paul were writing to us today, what kinds of modern idols do you think he would warn us about? What are the things in our 21st century world that have the potential to take God's rightful place in our lives?
That's a really thought-provoking question.
Yeah.
It makes you realize that idolatry isn't just an ancient problem. It's something we still grapple with today, often without even realizing it.
Exactly. And sometimes the most dangerous idols are the ones that masquerade as good things.
Okay, so let's brainstorm a bit. What are some of those good things that could potentially become idols in our modern world?
Well, technology immediately comes to mind. Smartphones, social media streaming services, video games. They can be amazing tools for connection, entertainment, and even learning, but they can also become incredibly addictive and consume our time and attention, pulling us away from things that are truly important.
It's like we're constantly bombarded with notifications, updates, and messages, vying for our attention. It's easy to feel overwhelmed and lose sight of what truly matters.
And it's not just the devices themselves, it's what they represent. The fear of missing out, the need for constant validation, the pressure to project a perfect image online. These things can easily become idols if we're not careful.
I know, I've definitely fallen into the trap of comparing myself to others on social media, and it never ends well. It just leaves me feeling inadequate and empty.
That's so relatable. It's easy to get caught up in the comparison game and lose sight of our own unique value and purpose. And then there's consumerism, the constant pressure to buy more, have more, experience more. It's everywhere we turn.
It's like we're told that happiness is found in accumulating things.
Yeah.
Rather than in cultivating contentment and gratitude for what we already have.
You're right. We can become so focused on acquiring the next gadget, the latest fashion trend, the bigger house, that we lose sight of the things that truly bring lasting joy and fulfillment. Relationships, experiences, purpose, meaning.
And it's not just material possessions, is it? Our careers, our ambitions, our desire for success and recognition, these things can also become idols if we allow them to define our worth and identity.
Absolutely. We can pour all our time and energy into achieving our goals, climbing the ladder, building our reputation, and neglect our families, our friends, our spiritual well-being. We can become so driven by ambition that we forget who we are and whose we are.
It's like we're sacrificing everything at the altar of success, only to find that it doesn't bring the satisfaction we hoped for. It leaves us feeling empty and unfulfilled.
You've hit the nail on the head. And, even things that are inherently good, like relationships, family, health, and fitness, can become idols if we elevate them above God.
That's an interesting point. I guess anything can become an idol if we allow it to consume our thoughts, our time, our energy, and our hearts. If it becomes the lens through which we view the world and make decisions, then it's effectively become our God.
You're exactly right. It's about recognizing what has ultimate authority in our life. Where do we turn for comfort, for security, for validation? Who or what do we ultimately trust to give us meaning and purpose? If the answer isn't God, then we need to take a step back and reevaluate our priorities.
It's a challenge, for sure. But Paul reminds us that we're not alone in this battle. He assures us that God is faithful and will always provide a way out of temptation.
Yes, he's not just pointing out our flaws and condemning us. He's offering hope and encouragement. He's reminding us that he's always there for us, ready to help us overcome our struggles and walk in freedom.
So how do we do it? How do we guard our hearts against idolatry in a world that's so full of distractions and temptations? What are some practical steps we can take to make sure God remains at the center of our lives?
I think it starts with being aware of our own weaknesses. Those areas where we're most susceptible to temptation. What are the things that tend to pull us away from God? What are the triggers that cause us to stumble? Once we identify those areas, we can start to put safeguards in place.
That makes sense. It's like knowing your enemy and anticipating their moves.
Yeah.
You can prepare your defenses and be ready to fight back when temptation strikes.
Exactly. It might mean setting boundaries with technology, limiting our time on social media, being more intentional about the things we allow into our minds and hearts. It might involve simplifying our lifestyles, decluttering our homes, and focusing on experiences rather than possessions.
And it definitely involves spending time in God's Word, praying and connecting with other believers who can encourage us and hold us accountable.
Absolutely. We need that support system, that community of faith, to help us stay on track and resist the allure of the world. It's like having a team of cheerleaders and coaches who are there to encourage us when we're feeling weak and to challenge us when we start to stray.
As we've been talking about all this, I keep coming back to that verse we mentioned earlier, whether therefore ye eat or drink or whatsoever you do, do all to the glory of God. It's such a powerful reminder that every aspect of our lives, from the mundane to the extraordinary, can be an act of worship.
You're right. It's about finding ways to honor God in the everyday details, in the way we work, the way we interact with others, the way we use our resources, the way we care for our bodies and minds. It's about letting his love and grace permeate every aspect of our being.
It's about making him visible in a world that often seems to have forgotten him. It's about being a light in the darkness, a beacon of hope, a reflection of his goodness and truth.
Beautifully said. And as we wrap up this deep dive into 1 Corinthians 10, I can't help but feel a sense of gratitude for Paul's wisdom and insight. He was writing to a specific church in a specific time and place, but his words are just as relevant for us today.
They are. He's given us a roadmap for navigating the complexities of life in a world that's constantly trying to pull us away from God. He's reminded us of the dangers of idolatry, the importance of considering the needs of others, and the ultimate goal of living for God's glory.
He's challenged us to examine our own lives, to identify those things that have the potential to become idols, and to make a conscious choice to put God first in everything we do. He's reminded us that we're not alone in this journey. We have God's grace, his strength, and his guidance to help us along the way. And we have each other, a community of believers who can support us, encourage us, and challenge us to live lives that truly reflect his glory.
It's been an incredible journey through 1 Corinthians 10, and I hope our listeners have been inspired to dig deeper into God's Word and allow his truth to transform their lives.
I do too. Remember, the journey doesn't end here. There's so much more to discover in the scriptures, and we encourage you to keep exploring, keep seeking, and keep growing in your faith.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. Until next time, may you live each day in the freedom and joy that comes from knowing and loving the one true God.